Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. As leaders from around the world gather at the UN General Assembly, the Holy See is weighing in on global foreign policy. In an exclusive interview in New York City, I sat down with the Holy See's Secretary for Relations with States. Archbishop Paul Gallagher staked out a number of strong positions. We begin as the Vatican's de facto foreign minister sends a clear signal to President Trump. Archbishop Gallagher, thank you so much for joining me on EWTN News Nightly.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be with you.
The American Secretary of State says the U.S. is considering closing the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba, because of an acoustic attack. The Holy See played a very key role in reestablishing relations after more than a 50-year freeze. I was in Cuba when President Obama visited and the embassy was open. If it closes, would the Holy See intervene again?
Well, we intervened, if that is actually the right expression. I would tend to say that we offered our good offices to two parties who were looking to consolidate the rapprochement that had already begun. I think that if that were to happen again, if there were to be an approach to us to say, well, you know, there have been these difficulties, maybe we can facilitate something, certainly we're always willing to do that. We would like to see the progress and the hope that was brought about by this reopenness of the United States to Cuba and what all that symbolized, not just for the two countries, but for the world, not to be lost. At the same time, I think you have to obviously, the American authorities have to take responsibility for their people who are on the ground there, and these are serious matters. But one would hope that some way could be found to make sure that the great advances that were achieved a couple of years ago can be preserved for the future and built upon.
The United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on North Korea following multiple tests of a nuclear device. And the president of South Korea, who's Catholic, earlier this year asked Pope Francis and the Vatican to bring peace to the Korean peninsula. As tensions continue to escalate, is Pope Francis going to try to intervene? Will the Vatican intervene in this current crisis?
Well, the Pope is always willing to do anything that is asked of him and which we believe is going to be effective. My particular view at the moment of the Korean crisis is it is fundamentally a crisis of communication. In that we cannot resolve this because there is very little real communication going on. So I think that is the thing that we are trying to break through into. Now, to be honest, at the moment there are not many initiatives, but if some opportunity were to present itself, I'm sure that in coming weeks, coming months, how this crisis unfolds, the Holy Father will be adding his voice to this thing, his appeal and his prayers. But we just have to see what opportunities present themselves. But I think that is, at the moment, the principal difficulty is that can we talk to the North Korean leadership? And today I've heard at the UN, many appeals to him, to stop this thing, to back down. But at the moment, it all seems to be falling on deaf ears. What we have to do, perhaps, is ourselves listen to what's coming from there and try and bridge this gap of non-communication.
Venezuela is in real crisis right now, and President Maduro called President Trump Hitler after President Trump's speech. The Secretary General is supporting efforts to negotiate this human rights crisis. Pope Francis has voiced his concern about the situation. He met with Venezuelan bishops on his recent trip to Colombia. On his way back to Rome, he also said that the UN should make itself felt in alleviating this humanitarian crisis. How do you plan to convey the Pope's appeal for a greater UN presence on the ground?
I'm going to talk to the Secretary General in the next couple of days. I have an appointment with him, so I will be talking to him about this and about other conflicts in the world in which we feel the UN could be playing a greater role.
Are there other countries other than Venezuela that you are at liberty to tell me where you are going to be requesting a greater UN presence?
Again, I believe that in the North Korean, the crisis in the Korean Peninsula, I think the UN could be a very good broker to try and help us with this communication problem, because the Secretary General does represent the the community of nations. He does represent, in one sense, everybody and nobody. So I think we do feel something could be done there.
Later in the show, the Archbishop comments on President Trump's pro-life stance. And tomorrow, in part 2 of our interview, the Archbishop talks about migration and the importance of protecting Christians and religious minorities around the globe.